This is the Thought Leaders Podcast.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And before we begin, I would love if you can kind of just give our listeners a little quick take on who you are, for those of you who don't know you.
Wow, who is Dan Conn on an existential level or on a professional level? Well, let's do a bit of both. So
Let's do a
professional
little
level,
mix, yeah.
real mix. So I am a CRO of ThoughtLeaders, which means that I am responsible for everything related to the revenue generation activities of the company. I'm also a co-founder, so I've been doing that since the beginning, back when we were a newsletter. And my professional background before that is in the marketing SaaS world. So I guess my bio has always been a marketing department of some kind or shape or form, slightly different profiles within it. But I've been in that sphere for around 10 years altogether, various technologies.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought up marketing because, as people know, listening to the podcast and those who are new, we're really diving deep into the world of YouTube and podcast and branded content. And you did mention marketing, which is great because when those platforms came about 10 years ago, they were really consumer, you were there to consume content. And now it's become synonymous with marketing and brands also talking and being featured. So I would love to hear your take on how you think that transition happened and what you think of it and where you see it going.
It was interesting. Well, first of all, I'm not sure 100% agree that today it's seen as marketing. Obviously, there's a connection between the content that comes out and the brands that are in there, and of course there are in YouTube comments when there is a integration. There's always somebody going, "Oh, another Audible ad," or something. You do see that, but I think that the reason why it works as a marketing channel is because people still are there to see the content. And they connect with the content creators and they get value from it. And the best marketing channels are actually the ones where the content is of a quality that keeps people coming back. So it's still very much the content that's the driver. I think there is an interplay between the commercialization of these platforms and the spurring of content. Actually, we're doing analysis of this right now using our own data sets. One of the things that we're looking at is how certain trends of content emerge over time. Who are the first brands that appeared there, and what that did in terms of increasing the curve of that type of content. So, for example, when did true crime podcasts start appearing? When was when did sponsoring true crime podcasts really kind of kick in? And then what does that do to the growth of true crime podcasts? And this, I think, is where you can see that we've done a few different analyses here, and we'll continue to do them, but we've done it for true crime podcasts, we've done it for live play games, and we've done it for I would say lifestyle, but it's more detailed than that. It's more like what I eat in a day, home workout style of lifestyle YouTuber. And we'll continue to do these, but in each case, it's amazing what you see. You see an initial pioneer or an initial group of content creators that develop this, and the obvious success that have come from that, both in terms of views and interest. And you see that because they repeat it. You see the brand starting to appear, and then you see this acceleration, both in the proliferation of that type of content and in terms of the number of brands that are appearing and the number of sponsorships. So there is definitely a inflection point now for any type of content that's getting put out there where it becomes very much into the commercial sphere, where it becomes a type of content that people want to sponsor or want to work with en masse. They can identify and say, well, there's a whole genre of true crime podcasts or a whole genre of live play games, and that I can go and bring my product to market with scale because there's many of them. And that's a very different proposition than working with somebody who's unique and out there. For example, one of my favorite YouTubers, and we all got our weird corners in YouTube that we go down, right? But one of my favorite YouTubers is Gel's Marble Runs. I love it. Marble Olympics. I think it's the best thing that's happened to sports.
Can you let people know? Because I know I love it also, but for those who don't know what it is, can you give them a quick?
It's amazing. It's fantastic. So
a quick breakdown.
So I think Gel might be Dutch or German. I think that's the case. But he works with this, I guess, American voiceover specialist. And what they do is they create this world of marble Olympics, marble sports with these obstacle courses. There's set teams that come and compete, and they bring such a quality to the work and such an energy and humor in the commentary. It's really like watching a live sporting event. And now there's only one of them. Maybe somebody copycats it, but I don't think you're going to get, with the amount of work that goes into it, you're not going to get a mass proliferation of people making marble sports. It's too hard to do. Whereas it's really easy to make another channel about video game history, right? Because the information's out there. It's just how you aggregate it. Or whatever subject you want to dive into, home workouts, as we kind of discussed. And in those cases, it becomes a very different proposition. So, interestingly enough, I know that they used to be sponsored by SeatGeek, which makes perfect sense. You actually see their logos. It's a very different type of sponsorship. You actually see their logos in the stadium as though it were like they're sponsoring.
Product placement almost. I really like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it was cool. I loved it. I got really excited about it. I was really trying to figure out ways that we could work with Gel. Actually, I'm really happy to say that another piece of content that I very different TV content, although I actually watch on YouTube, is This Week Tonight, John Oliver's show. And I was super excited. They highlighted him this week as an alternative to coming back to regular sports too quickly because of the pandemic, and they're now the season sponsor.
That's very cool
for Gel's Marble Runs. So I'm loving that. But in terms of the context of commercialization, there's a very different thing there. There is finding something that's a gem, that's special, that you can do as a one-off interesting piece, but it's never going to take up masses of your budget, right? Not if you're a big company. Whereas you do see mass buying, mass proliferation of hundreds, if not thousands, of creators from companies like Audible, Skillshare, and everybody else is just following suit. They're finding their little area to go into, and it's all kinds of brands.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up what I like to call the big boys in the business, called the Audible, the Skillshare, the Dollar Shave Club. So I could be wrong here, but for the most part, I don't think they are doing the traditional media buying companies. These are, if you ask someone under the age of 40 right now, or really almost anybody, these are brands that are synonymous with them, that they know, and they've been able to do this. So why would a brand, because I think a lot of people ask me this in my personal life, why would a brand decide to go the YouTube or podcast route as opposed to traditional media? Do you think you could kind of dive into that, what the advantages are?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily opposed to. I mean, I think that you're going to find many of these brands doing marketing promotion on other channels, whether that be TV, whether that be radio, Super Bowl sponsorship. A lot of these guys, I mean, I think Squarespace was doing the Super Bowl last year, right? Wix before them.
Yeah.
And Squarespace is one of those brands where, they are everywhere. And content. So it's not that this is necessarily replacing or saying I'm only a sponsored content marketing company, or like that's my sole focus. But what it does allow is for marketers a very effective new channel. And then marketers are always looking for new channels. They're always looking to experiment and to bring them in. Certainly the good ones are. And so I think that when these sorts of companies started leading the way, I mean, originally it will have been a test. I haven't spoken to whoever started podcast or YouTube sponsorship at Audible, right? I haven't had that chat with somebody. I would love to. But at some point it was a test. At some point they allocated some budget, maybe some significant budget, and said, well, let's see how this does. And then something magical happened. It worked.
It did.
They worked. They could.
Yeah. So why don't you explain to people who might not know, what does that mean it worked?
So there's different types, and there's different calculations of this, and I think it splits roughly into two groups. I'd say there's the LTV group, and there's the ROAS group. So there are brands out there that are very much looking at what sponsorship can deliver them over time. As they're looking at all their marketing channels this way. It's not exclusively for sponsorship, but looking at what their marketing spend can deliver them over time and through the lifetime of a customer. And then you've got ROAS group, or very much focused on direct response. Do I make my money back immediately on the dollars that I spent? And the amazing thing is that it works for both. Now, it definitely changes your buying decisions. It definitely affects the cost of the media that you can pay. It definitely affects how hard you come and negotiate with creators or networks or whoever's doing the media selling to get the deal that you need to build out your funnel. But the amazing thing is that it works for both. So even just as a pound for pound cost-effective marketing channel, is working for both types. Now, there's two things. There's a macro and then there's a micro, I would say. There's the macro, which says, does YouTube sponsorship work for X brand, or does podcast sponsorship for X brand? You can even throw a content theme in there. Does gaming YouTube work for VPN sponsorship? Can I use true crime podcasts, to bring that example up again, work for direct to consumer ROAS sponsorship? So that's the macro question. But within that, you've got the micro questions. Does this individual true crime podcast work for me? Does the individual gaming YouTuber perform as well as the next one? And that's the discovery process that every brand goes through. What they're looking for is the stars, the gems, that are going to be the ones that they come back to time and time again. And really, Pareto works in this world. I think you'll find that 80% or so, Pareto is 80% comes from the top 20%. That's a rough approximation of what happens here for most brands. They do a lot of experimentation. Some of them experiment really quickly and then pull back the brakes a little bit. Some of them grow steadily. But there's an expectation that many of the places that they try are going to fail. But the ones that work so well that it keeps the macro going. So let's take a specific example. Let's look at, we did an analysis of the 3 top VPNs recently, who are very price sensitive in terms of their sponsorship, and very much looking at scale. And we were doing an analysis. So these were NordVPN, these are ExpressVPN, these were Surfshark. And something amazing we saw is that for the last 2 years, all of these guys have been remarkably consistent in the amount of new places that they were testing each quarter, around 50 plus, right? So there's some fluctuation. Sometimes it's 50, sometimes it's 70, occasionally it's 30, but it hovered around that line and been remarkably consistent. The amount of channels that they did more than 3 sponsorships with was relatively few and far between. We're talking about maximum a quarter. But their graphs were going like this, like of their overall mentions. Why? Because they were constantly testing new channels and adding new ones into the mix. So what does that tell you? It sounds counterintuitive, but if I'm failing 75% of my tests, but my spend is going like this, it shows you just how effective a good channel is.
Yeah,
So
because it counteracts the.
exactly. So
It's really interesting.
So it's the key to all of this is finding your success ratio and being as good with it as possible. Because if you can find ways to eliminate the channels that are not performing as well from that mix before you've even spent it, and you, let's say, have a 50% success ratio or a 60% success ratio, then as a channel, it's going to be mind-blowing for you. We see that. Yeah, so it's really interesting stuff about how brands are looking at this and what it takes to succeed.
Yeah. Do you think that the fact that it's so trackable, meaning you throw a link on the bottom of a YouTube video, the brand knows, every single time someone clicks on that, as opposed to traditional media, how big of a factor do you think that instant reporting is for any brand when it comes to their decision of getting into this space or continuing in the space and growing?
I think tracking in general is really important for brands. Everybody wants to track these days. Well, not everybody. Some people still aren't choosing to track, but it depends on what type of company you are. That being said, in this day and age, like if you watch a lot of American TV, and I try and watch American TV as much as I can because it gives me a lot of insights into how many of the brands that are also doing sponsorship are tackling that that channel. And what you'll see today, and there's been a proliferation of it, is very much the same thing that you'll see when you sponsor a podcast or sponsor in YouTube. You'll see a unique, on a TV campaign, you'll see a unique URL / some kind of code keyword to let them know that it's a TV exclusive offer. Right? So for example, stamps.com, I think this is correct if my memory serves me right. Stamps.com, massive sponsor of podcasts, do tons, right? On their TV promotions, you'll see it says stamps.com / try, and that's an indication that you get a 50% offer. There's no real difference there than they're tracking in podcasts, right? It's a similar function. You come to the right URL, and we know it's come from this channel, and you redeem your offer. So the tracking is an important aspect of the marketing channel, but it's not what makes the channel. What makes the channel is that the content creators are really good at owning their audience, the good ones. They have built this relationship with their fans. People support them for a myriad of reasons. And people have different approaches to this as creators. Sometimes you'll hear creators really say, if you choose to use these products, if it's relevant for you, please come to us because it supports the channel. Mm-hmm. So if you're like me, I know you're not paying for my content, right? But you do feel an association with me. You want to support what we're doing. So by using this link, you do support the channel. And that's a direct plea. It's not even just in podcasts. Some of the big newsletters, I think it's, if you read The Hustle newsletter, which is one of my favorite newsletters, it's an amazing organization that they've built. But many times they'll have a little note next to the sponsorship note at the top of the newsletter, which says, choosing this brand helps support the Hustle's activities. So there's this emotional plea that comes from it. And the other side of it, of the same coin, is that because you're such a fan of the content creator, you believe them. You're more likely to be influenced by them, right? So that is a responsibility that the creator has, but it's also an amazing opportunity. I'm very curious to see where this goes in the long term. All right, so just a thought, thoughts that occur to me is like obviously there's it just announced the other day that Facebook has made this new kind of widget for businesses to help make e-commerce more easy to create from their business pages. And I applied that kind of thing to the world of the creators, and we've seen creators really become entrepreneurs and adopt tools to support them from an income perspective. Things like Patreon, right, which is perhaps just from a subscription basis. Things like Big Cartel and Teespring, where you create you can basically create your own product line that people can buy their t-shirts or their sweatshirts or whatever it is from you. I wonder how far away we are from tech which goes, well, audience, what is it the thing that you need? What do you need to buy? What do you want to buy? And let me go and build the relationships with brands and have an easy way that you can purchase it through me and get a deal. Because right now we've got brands coming to creators, and even creators coming to brands with media kits and everything like this. But as of yet, we're not in the situation where people are actually saying to their audiences, what do you want? What do you need? And I think that's going to be a really interesting angle, a really interesting proliferation. Because theoretically, you should be finding that there should be a similarity in desires from a creator's audience. If I'm watching a gaming YouTube channel, for example, theoretically, the rest of the audience of that gaming YouTube channel should be interested in various things related to, even tangentially related to gaming. So can I create a product store, right, for example, that is this kind of sponsorship revenue hybrid where I actually mention them and talk about how much I like the product in my channels, and then come and buy it from my personalized store. And so all of these things I think are opportunities that can be seen and can be developed in that creator and brand relationship. And it's all coming from leveraging the influence that the creators have over their audience and the relationship that they have with them.
So it sounds a little bit like, and I could be wrong, a little bit like affiliate programming, almost, where for those of you who don't know, it's not sponsored by a specific brand, but you're going to see a link, for example, in the description of the YouTube video of a product featured, and if you click that link, the creator is going to get a small percentage of that or a nominal small fee. So you're saying this would be on a completely different level, though, right?
I'm not discussing really here yet about the economics of I guess how they get paid. It's more of the interaction. Like, do you see, obviously there's a situation where the best creators are sought after, and what's more is that brands want to build long-term relationships with them. So in some occasions, even exclusive relationships with them. The question is, what's the absolute best way to build that connection, right? And that's more the question as to whether things get paid on affiliate or whether you do a long-term sponsorship takeover where your product is featured 10 times in the channel over 12 months, but is a permanent fixture in their store. I think the economics can work themselves out, and the market will bear what business models can work. But it's more to say, what is the way you can explore it? So one of the things that we think about in ThoughtLeaders is around these issues. So what would it look like for a brand, for example, to really take over a YouTube channel? Right now you do, actually kind of similar to the way that TV shows were sponsored in the 50s, where it's like you have a prime time hour brought to you by whoever, right?
The variety hours and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically a bit different because that's like a fully owned like asset of that company.
Yeah.
But it's close enough. What happens when you found the perfect creator for you? And there's this symbiosis where the alignment is perfect. And the question then is, what does a full takeover look like? Does the brand feature in the header of the channel? Do you feature the brand's own channel in the recommended videos? What kind of real estate do you get in the description sections of all their videos? Are they featuring in all their title cards? Is their logo on screen at all times? What does a complete integration look like? And what does that work out to? Because I think in many cases, and we do see examples of this, we do see cases where brands really take over a channel and are the exclusive sponsor of a particular podcast or YouTuber, etc., etc. And it's curious to see where those lines are and how that develops, rather than just like, okay, I've done my little sponsored video and I've been there once, or maybe I'll come back once every quarter and I look at the buyer that way. How do I find my ambassadors and how do I really connect with them? And I think that's going to be an interesting proliferation in this space, as more and more of the best talent is going to want to be scooped up and held close by the brands that are working with them.
Yeah, I think I would like to see where that goes and what that sees. I think the landscape is changing a lot. And speaking of changing landscapes, I'm not sure if you saw the big news in the industry last night with Joe Rogan, $100 million plus deal going exclusively to Spotify at the end of 2020.
He's pinned down.
Yeah, he has made it.
Yeah.
Cut out there for a second. I would love your thoughts on that and your take on, do you think this is something that is going to make a huge difference and a big change going exclusively to Spotify?
It's definitely going to make waves. And I think it hints to exactly what I was talking about before. Spotify, Joe's one of the biggest in the game, supremely popular. And in this case, we're not talking about a brand's ownership or sponsor exclusivity arrangement. We're talking about a platform exclusivity arrangement. And it just shows the point. The best talent, and it is talent in the entertainment sort of parlance, is gonna get scooped up one way or another. Right? In this case, Spotify is going after and making it exclusive to build a fence around themselves, and Joe's an amazing asset for that. So it's going to be really interesting to see who can compete with that. Does iTunes try and do more in the exclusive world? Right. Who else is competing with Spotify and that side? Stitch, I don't know, but you're looking at this world and saying, well, how does this? How do I grab the best talent? So yeah, it's definitely going to make waves. So it's a pretty huge one. I for one, am going to miss him on YouTube because that's where I do my Joe Rogan listening. So
I think it's still going to be on YouTube. I think it was just the audio.
I think no. I think from what I understand, it's going to be on YouTube until the end of the year.
And
it's going to be on Spotify from September, and then from the end of the year. Unless I've misunderstood, it's not going to be any new content on YouTube.
Oh, okay. But I was thinking about it last night, and in my opinion, right, one of the best parts about podcasts, a little less about YouTube because there is only one platform. Podcasts, for the most part, as opposed to other types of media, you can kind of consume it wherever you want, right? I have Stitcher, I have Stitcher, I have Pocket Cast, I have iTunes, I have Spotify. For the most part, whatever is convenient for me, I listen to. With Joe, who is perhaps the biggest podcast in the game, going exclusively to one platform, do you see that perhaps affecting his place as a marketing guru, essentially, because he could pretty much sell anything? Or you don't think it's going to matter?
No, I don't think it has an impact at all. I mean, it's not like he's gone into some sort of niche player. Spotify has gone. a massive user base, and it's going to grow because all those Joe users that aren't currently Spotify users are going to come to Spotify. I mean, that's the point. That's exactly why they've brought him along. I imagine that somebody like Joe Rogan is going to bring a bunch of people to the platform. So I don't think it affects it. I think it only enhances, to be honest. Joe Rogan's now $100 million man.
I mean, I'm sure he was before, but now it's official and we all know it.
Yeah, look, I was doing one stuff, but there's a big, people love big deals. People love the drama of a big deal. It's only going to raise his profile. There's going to be more people that now tune in and go, well, how good is he that he's worth $100 million, right? That maybe haven't listened to Joe before. So I don't think it negatively impacts his ad revenue at all. Yeah.
I'm glad we're talking about Joe Rogan because on Joe, and for those who listen or don't listen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the brands that feature or sponsor the show are direct-to-consumer brands. Why do you think that direct-to-consumer is just so big in YouTube and podcasts? They're just like it seems that every new brand coming up, you're going to hear them first on your favorite podcast before you'll hear them anywhere else when it comes to advertising.
I think there's a few reasons. I think, firstly, at this stage now, it's because everybody else is doing it. So you hear things on a podcast, you see a YouTube video where brands have been mentioned, and you have for several years now. So you go, well, at least let me try it, right? Because there's enough people that have seem to be doing it a lot and seem to be having success with it. I think that, especially in the case of someone like Joe, but definitely not exclusively, there's lots of people that fit this profile. They make an excellent testing ground. These are real people who talk authentically about their subjects. They don't take any old brands. They tend to be very protective about who they work with. Not everybody, but most. And so when they do talk about a brand, they probably really like it. Like we've seen a whole range of products that have come through Joe in recent years. Things like what's that jeans company? Revolut Jeans, was it?
RevTown.
Revolut Jeans. RevTown, for example.
I bought from.
I know you have
3 pairs. I heard them on Joe Rogan, and they're great. Shout out to RevTown jeans. Yeah, phenomenal jeans. If you're looking for an $80 pair of jeans, definitely, really great stuff. But anyway, sorry.
I mean, you just highlighted the case in point. Obviously, we're not at the stage yet with this podcast where you're getting sponsors. But let's say you're a year or two down the road, right? And you have your tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of listeners that tune in every week.
One can only hope.
One can only hope. But you highlighted exactly in that one little soundbite that you provided exactly why this kind of marketing works well. You love the brand. You use the brand. You're a fan of it. And in many cases, obviously, you get introduced to a brand when they reach out to you, but you play around with it. You see the value of it, or you don't promote it. And again, this is not exclusively the case. It's not that every product that you see promoted is one that they are been using for years, but there is obviously something that they like about it, and so they can talk happy about it. That could literally have been a RevTown ad, and it would have been believable to go say, like, I use it, I wear it every day. And that's exactly what happens with Joe Rogan when he talks about a product. It's because he really likes it, and Joe's at a stage now where he definitely is only choosing products or brands that he likes the look of. Right, so that's why it works, And if you can't bring yourself to say something convincing about the brand If you don't like the brand, if there is no connection there, and you don't think it's valuable to your audience, please don't accept them as a sponsor. Just don't. If you can't have something that is convincing and nice to say, don't. Because I actually see, it'd be interesting. There's a strain of type of podcaster now. Actually, not too dissimilar from Joe, and I see it that are like comic podcasts or people like Chris D'Elia, right?
For
He's funny,
Crusher, yeah, that whole crowd.
funny guy, really funny guy, and it's interesting to me. Chris D'Elia in particular. And I'm not trying to call out any names. He's definitely not even going to see this, but even if he was, I'm a fan. I like Chris D'Elia, but the way what I don't appreciate is the way that when he has had sponsors integrate with his show, the way he talks about it. Because it's like, oh, this company does, whatever thing, but, like really intentionally to enhance the comedic side of the content, be very nonchalant or non-caring about the sponsor message. He's not alone. I see a lot of people do this that are almost embarrassed or feel that there's going to be this negative reaction to them having said sponsor or any kind of sponsor on it, so they do it. First of all, like in these situations, like, well, why have you accepted a sponsorship in the first place? If you're not willing to talk about it in a positive light, don't accept them. You don't help anybody. You're not going to help your own credibility because people are going to see that you think it's a negative thing, and you're going to get more sponsors because you want the money. And so that's just going to compound itself, that feeling. You're not going to help the brand because what's the chances of you talking negatively about something and somebody actually going and buying it, right? Or to not express enthusiasm. And you're not going to help your audience because you don't think that they want that thing, which is why you've talked about it in a sort of jokey or negative or whatever way. So I think that's a it's not exclusively to that. Like there's a bunch of creators that do it. I watch a lot of Manchester United content on YouTube. Probably too much. Content's amazing for fans, by the way. It's a whole other subject, but it amazes me that more sports teams don't actually engage directly through these channels. Like it's just they keep them on the side, but that's a different subject. And one of these channels, I'm not going to name names because I'm a fan, actually subscribe to them. Every time they get a brand sponsor on, they do this. They do this thing. It's like, oh, well, whatever brand has sponsored us, it's great. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why bother? They're not going to be back. So the few $100 or the few $1,000s that you've got for that one integration, it's worthwhile to damage the connection you have with the audience and damage the connection you have with brands and positions. That's the flip side of the coin in terms of like people that don't do it well. But when people like Joe, who actually talk enthusiastically about the people that he's working with, magic. You can't get better.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to. It's really about, the quality of a product. If someone's willing to get out there and advertise something to their audience and they believe in it, it just makes it so much better. And to shift now to kind of the other side of the industry, the B2B side, why do you think that is doing so well there in branded content? Which for me, as a B2C guy, I'm always shocked by it.
Well, it's not that shocking if you think about it. Again, we've just done a big analysis of different types of B2B sponsorships, and B2B is a very broad term, right? B2B could be, something like a Squarespace, right? Which is like they definitely market like a consumer product, but
right.
their dream, or mostly who they're after are like people that have small businesses or want to create a small business or do some kind of commerce. Yeah. So in a way, it's B2B, but it's not really include those sorts of people in that bracket.
Yeah, I was talking more the SaaS and the
right. So this is related to the fact that content is really easy to create these days. So if you have an area of expertise, you can build up an audience around that subject matter, which is why there are all kinds of sales podcasts, marketing podcasts, law podcasts, retail podcasts, newsletters. Whatever you want, whatever genre, subgenre, niche customization. The amount of times we've spoken to B2B brands, so there's no way that you're finding my audience anywhere. And the amount of times you'll find literally there's a very specific niche profile in the name of a bunch of different podcasts or whatever it may be. That well, actually, they don't talk about you yet because you've not been there, but they talk about your industry and your world almost exclusively. So that's why it works on the niche side of things. And then what you have is there is a bracket of amazing crossover channels. And these are some of the best, I think, that there are. We talked about The Hustle as a newsletter previously. We put Morning Brew in that bracket as well. People like Tim Ferriss on the podcast side, where they have mass appeal audiences. Millions of people listen or read this content. But the focus of the content is about business. Because business is an important part of our lives. It's an important subject. So for this elite grouping, they're not niche. They'll talk about various different angles of business and subjects and all kinds. The people that are listening to them or reading them are coming with a business hat on. They're coming to that content thinking with their business brain. And so if they're coming to that content thinking about this business brain, they're actually going to be very receptive to tools and solutions that's going to help them improve their business.
Yeah, so you're saying it's almost they're looking to buy something. Not necessarily, but they're definitely
They're open to it. They're open-minded to it in that situation.
So this content is more, they're consuming it from a professional standpoint as opposed to a personal standpoint, which makes the sale easier, which I understand.
I'll give you a prime example, right? Tim Ferriss works with, I'm not 100% sure, to double check on this actually, but let's say Salesforce wants to do a promotion. They do a lot of sponsored content, specifically for their Essentials product, but not exclusively. There's a difference between Salesforce sponsoring Tim Ferriss versus Salesforce sponsoring Joe Rogan, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, there's a lot of commonalities between Joe and Tim Ferriss, and they love each other. Joe Rogan talks about Tim Ferriss all the time. Big fan. But the focus, the profile of the content is slanted towards business more with Tim, which makes Salesforce makes him a viable sponsorship channel for someone like Salesforce. Whereas I would say that they might get success from working with Joe Rogan, but it's jarring to the content. What the hell does Joe know about running a SaaS company or business or growth? He doesn't care. Never done it. He's not interested in it. He's a comedian. He's a very articulate and intelligent comedian who is very curious. So I'm sure he would love to dive into business subject matter with somebody, but it's not the subject of the content. So that's a distinction. That's a clear distinction there. So the ones that are in that upper bracket of business, the ones that have massed major audiences are gold, because you'll see these guys that do both B2B and B2C perfectly well. That's what you'll see if you look in the Hustles and Morning Brews. Equally comfortable promoting a SaaS solution and a watch.
Yeah.
And both come back to sponsor. A lot. Exactly. So that's the one side of the B2B, and then the other side is the very, very particular niche audiences that address exactly the subject matter of the profile you want to reach. and that's your audience. That's the people you're trying to generate leads from. So why not find them all amassed in one place?
Yeah. It's I think, and unfortunately this is all the time we have today, but I think that we definitely got into some really interesting things, and a lot of people in my personal life and people you meet kind of are a little confused by what it is branded content, right? They're like, wow, is that really working? And I think just hearing from you really clears up a lot of that kind of what is it, why do you do it? So thank you so much for joining.
This is the Thought Leaders Podcast.